Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7 by 7. So while we wait for the second weekend results for Solo: A Star Wars Story at the box office, I thought it might be fun to talk about this idea of brand fatigue. The idea that, hey, maybe casual moviegoers in general and Star Wars fans in specific are not as thrilled by the fourth movie in 3.5 years. The idea that, hey, maybe too much Star Wars isn't necessarily a good thing, that we're finally hitting the point where we're testing the market's desire for a certain level of Star Wars. And this brand fatigue idea doesn't necessarily hold water with a lot of people. And one of the reasons that gets cited is the comparison to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. People say, well, they're releasing 2 and 3 movies at a time and they're doing fantastic at the box office. You've got Avengers Infinity War doing tremendous business, and Black Panther came out just a couple months before that, and Deadpool doing good business now. And so, that's a brand where brand fatigue isn't even an issue at all. And so how can you say that brand fatigue is an issue with Star Wars when they're not releasing nearly as many movies? Well, here's the thing. What Star Wars looks like right now is kind of similar to what the Marvel Cinematic Universe looked like back in 2008, but not even, because the release schedule is still actively more aggressive by comparison. So if you look back at the release dates for the movies for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the first one, the original Iron Man movie, came out in May of 2008. Now, the next one in the cinematic universe was the Incredible Hulk movie that came out exactly 1 month later in June, but I don't think anybody really considered that one to be a, MCU movie in specific. But when you go to the next one from there, the next one from there is Iron Man 2, and it came out 2 years later in 2010, May of 2010. So wiping the Hulk from the equation, which it was the Ed Norton Hulk, okay? So, it wasn't the Eric Bana Hulk either, but it wasn't the Mark Ruffalo Hulk. So we're talking about a different animal. I'm very well convinced of that. You're talking about 2 years in between the first 2 cinematic universe movies of note, the first and the second Iron Man movies. And the next movie that came out was 1 year after that. It was the Thor movie, the first Thor movie in May of 2011. It was followed in short order by the Captain America movie in July of 2011. And they roughly made about the same amount of money, around $180 million domestic. It was like 181 for Thor and 186 for Captain America. But here's where the very strange mistake that has been perpetuating the discussion has happened. So it's 4 movies in 3.5 years for the Marvel Cinematic Universe when it got started. And I think most outlets where you read about Star Wars' situation right now, they're saying the same thing, 4 movies in 3.5 years. That's actually not the case. The math is wrong. It's actually 4 movies in the space of 2.5 years. If you start the clock running in December of 2015 with The Force Awakens, then 1 year later, you've got 2 movies because Rogue One is out. 2 years later, you've got 3 movies because The Last Jedi is out. And then 2.5 years later, you've got 4 movies because Solo: A Star Wars Story is out. So it's actually 4 movies in 2.5 years, not in 3.5 years. So they're already on a more aggressive pattern than the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And you can see when the MCU got its Phase 1 start, they were very deliberate with their buildup. I mean, 2 years between the first 2 movies, and then a year between, the second and the third movies. And then they tried to push the envelope a bit with 2 months between 3 and 4. And it didn't really have an effect on anything. And the fact that it was dealing with a single character, and I would say Thor and Captain America, not as exciting as Iron Man by comparison. So you can kind of see how those 2 movies wouldn't necessarily do as well as Iron Man at the box office. But hey, they both did better than that Incredible Hulk movie, so, there's always a victory to be found in these things. Anyway, so that's the first part of the brand fatigue idea. The fact that most outlets seem to have the numbers wrong, that Star Wars is actually 4 movies in the space of 2.5 years versus 4 movies in the space of 3.5 years for the kickoff of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that they're comparing apples to oranges in that we're not talking about a situation where it's Black Panther and Infinity War coming out 2 months later, and that's what the whole comparison should be based on. It really should be based on how the cinematic universe started ramping up, because we're looking at the ramp up of Star Wars itself too. And that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Over on the audio version at sw7x7.com/iTunes, I'll do Last Jedi trivia with you. But for here and now, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.